Welcome to part 2 on death. It's a beautiful sunny day outside, and we're going to talk about death. Okay, death in the Psalms. Today we're going to be looking at Psalm 90, 38, and 102. And Carolyn did a good job last week of preparing us and telling us that the Psalter is very realistic about death, and that talked about Sheol and the non-life there and going to the pit and into nothingness, which is a dread. And then she ended by saying that, of course, Jesus is the answer to that, the resurrection. So, death is everywhere in our society. You can't think of the last movies you've seen. Somebody dies, right? Usually. I mean, that happened ever since Bambi. Yeah. That might have been the first real, everybody, that's horrifying. Why does Bambi have to die? Every child says. And in literature, death. I taught British literature for a number of years, and my students in the spring, they would say, "Are there any happy poems?" And I thought, I didn't make these poets. So I would have to dig for happy poems because they're all on how do we deal with time and how do we deal with our mortality? What are the ways? And Shakespeare, of course, has a lot to say on that. I just put some of the, from Romeo and Juliet, death lies on her like an untimely frost upon the sweetest flower of all the field. That's when Romeo sees his dead Juliet. Sad scene, but untimely. She's young, and we especially feel that when someone's young, even though she drank the poison. And then in Hamlet has to come to terms with death. Thou knowest 'tis common that all lives must die, passing through nature to eternity. And then I really like this. We cannot hold mortality's strong hand, no matter how we want to escape it. And our society is good at teaching us ways to escape it. Maybe if I just get this treatment to look 10 years younger, maybe I can escape mortality. And then a sonnet, like as the waves make toward the pebbled shore, so do our minutes hasten to their end. Life is short. And Shakespeare talks about time and the passage of time and how to beat time in so many of his sonnets. And his resolution is usually twofold. There are only a couple ways. One is by having children, by offspring, so he'll live on in the children. And sometimes he says beauty and love will live on, but he always will end with, it lives on in the poetry. Okay, it's written. So, and that's true. I say to my students, well, is that true? We're reading it right now. So it's still living. But that's how he rarely talks about eternal life in his poems. Sometimes he talks about, a few times about moral, being a moral person, somehow that can live. But that's just that's just Shakespeare. And if you can bear with me, I'm going to read you a poem. Remember, I'm the poem lady. So, but I didn't have time to type it up. Let me read it. It's by a Jesuit priest called Gerard Manley Hopkins, and it's called Spring and Fall. And if you imagine a little girl looking out at fall, at the leaves falling, you might have heard the story, and they're beautiful, and they're falling, and the little girl's crying. And my mom used to always cry when she saw leaves. And I would think, why are you crying? They're so beautiful. They're so beautiful. Margaret, are you grieving over golden grove unleaving? Leaves like the things of men, you with your fresh thoughts care for, can you? Ah, as the heart grows older, it will come to such sights colder. By and by, nor spare a sigh, the world's a one wood leaf mill lie, and yet you will weep and know why. Now, no matter, child, the same, Sorrow Spring, the name Sorrow Springs are the same. Nor mouth had known, nor mind expressed, what heart heard of, ghosts guess. It is the blight man was born for. It's Margaret you mourn for. So he's saying, you don't know yet, but you're really mourning your own death. So there is a sense, maybe, I don't know, I've started mourning the loss of my knees a little more. And a lot of you, you've been there or whatever, not being able to do the things you could do. But so there's that type of mourning. So we need to ask a question: how do the Psalms help us think faithfully about dying and death and the dead? So that's what we're going to look at today. So the first psalm is Psalm 90, but I want to give you a little background. So it is the only song of Moses in the Psalms. If the intro little part that I think was added later says Moses, man of God, and there are two others in Exodus and Deuteronomy. So one scholar I read said we shouldn't spend too much time trying to exactly identify what was going on, that sometimes we can nitpick that to death, whereas the Psalms were to be recited over and over and over again. And so well, so I put these down there. So one scholar got very specific of some of the things that might have been going on, but we do know that it was written, almost certainly written in the wilderness, on the way to Canaan. And Israel had a lot of needs during that time, and there was a lot of mourning and so forth. So yeah, there's the quote I was looking for. They're historically non-specific for the most part, and because they're used in the corporate worship service. So yeah, the best question to ask is, how did it function in the worship of Old Testament Israel? And then I guess we could take it one step further and say, how does it function in our time today? And we have the added benefit of the answer of Christ to all these Psalms. So that's, so moving on to the next one. So Psalm 90 is where it says, prayer of Moses, the man of God. So I got some information from the New International Version, and if you have that Bible, you might have read some of its commentary too. But he says, basically what we have here, we have a prayer to God to have compassion on his servants, those who live their melancholy lives under the rod of divine wrath and under the sentence of death. They're living that. Then there's a plea that yet God will still show them love and give them some cause for joy in this life, which this is kind of a depressing song in a lot of ways, and bless their labors with enduring work. Okay, so that's that idea of something enduring beyond me. So no other psalm depicts so poignantly the dismal state of the human condition. It really does, and there are parts of it that just are hard to read, before the face of God here. But it shouldn't surprise us that 40 years in the desert would bring forth such a response, right? Shouldn't be surprising. Now, it's divided into 5 sections, kind of. The first two stanzas and the last two sort of frame the whole passage. And you've got, and so at the beginning, you talk about God being the dwelling place and having shown his anger and so forth. And then you get 3 through 6, which is talking about the human condition. 7 through 10, again, the human condition. And then 11 through 12 is where it frames that, saying that Lord's everlasting, we're not. And then it ends in a prayer. Back to the beginning, it ends in a prayer. So just kind of notice how it's broken up as we go through it, this human condition. So at the beginning, I'll read it kind of in sections like this. Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever you had formed the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. You turn us back to dust and say, turn back, you mortals, for 1,000 years in your sight are like yesterday when it is past, or like a watch in the night. You sweep them away as if a flood. They're like a dream, like grass that's renewed in the morning. In the morning it flourishes and is renewed. In the evening it fades and withers. For we are consumed by your anger. By your wrath we are overwhelmed. You have set our iniquities before you, our secret sins in the light of your countenance. For all our days pass away under your wrath. Our years come to an end like a sigh. The days of our life are 70 years, or perhaps 80, if we're strong, if we're lucky. And then their span is only toil and trouble. That's the line that cut me. They are soon gone, and we fly away. Then we go to the framing part of the first one. Who considers the power of your anger? Your wrath is as great as the fear that is due you. So teach us to count our days that we may gain a wise heart. And here we move from the complaint to the prayer. Turn, O Lord, how long? Have compassion on your servants. Satisfy us in the morning with your steadfast love, so that we may rejoice and be glad all our days. Make us glad as many days as you have afflicted us, and as many years as we have seen evil. Let your work be manifest to your servants, and your glorious power to their children. Let the favor of the Lord our God be upon us, and prosper for us the work of our hands. Oh, prosper the work of our hands. So let's go back to the beginning, and he addresses him as Lord. The word dwelling place in Hebrew also is refuge. So your translation might have refuge in it. What do you glean from say that the first two verses? What stands out to you?
This life isn't where we really live. He's our dwelling.
Okay.
He's our place.
He's what?
He's our place.
Oh, okay, God's our place. That's a neat thing. God said we're never really at home unless we're with God. You've been our dwelling place in all generations, not just the beginning of the Exodus, but in all generations. Before anything existed, God was, God is now. You've been our dwelling place. It's before the mountains, everything from everlasting to everlasting. And that's a good thing. So he starts off with that. That's important to know. And then let's go to the human condition. You turn us back to dust. Well, by the way, I thought I'd put bright colors in there since we were talking about that. I got a little carried away, but the original was all black and white. I'm like, no, you can't do that. So if it offends you, if there's just too much and there's not a consistent theme.
Sorry.
Don't worry about it. You turn us back to dust. Well, you were at the Wednesday, the Lenten service, a reminder always, and say, turn back, you mortals, for 1,000 years in your sight, or like yesterday when it's past, or like a watch in the night. They used to have 3 watches the Israelites did in the night. So they're watching for their enemies. But it's like a watch in the night. Over. Doesn't take long. God's perception of time is very different, isn't it? 1,000 years in his sight. And that can be comforting. A friend of mine, this was a number of years ago, a friend of mine died, and I was just really concerned. I was reading all the passages about sleeping, and I just wanted to know, well, where is he? Is he asleep? Is he immediately in heaven with Jesus, like Jesus says on the cross? And my pastor at the time says, tell me about your last night's sleep. Did it go by quickly? And if I was, working in the midst of all that then, and you wake up and you're like, I just hit the pillow. Again, I've got to face another day. And he said, it's probably like that. That's the best I can say. He didn't really answer, but I still don't know all the answers. But his point is, God's time is different from our time. It may seem like a long time for us. And then he uses a lot of poetic language here. Sweep them away as of a flood. They're like a dream. Dreams pass pretty quickly, like grass flourishes and fades and withers. You find that a lot in the Bible, don't you, about grass withering. So he's really just contrasting our changeable state with God's unchangeable state. And God's everlasting, we're not. Our life's fleeting. And in God's eyes, 95 years, I say that because my mom's 95, is nothing. My husband used to, when he taught, he would tell the students, well, if it makes you feel any better, when I'm 125, you'll be 100. If that makes you feel better. You think I'm old? Okay. So, it's true. So Moses, there in the desert, seems to pass pretty slowly. You can imagine, right? In 7, when we're consumed by our anger, by your wrath or overwhelmed, we said our iniquities, our secret sins. God seems to be judging both the sins that were open as well as the hidden ones. So he's admitted. So this same God, that's part of the human condition, our sins. And again, all our days pass away under your wrath. Our years coming in like a sigh. Did you feel when you were reading 9 through 10, or this whole 7 through 10 of this section? In response to this?
It's not my experience.
It's not your experience.
No.
Okay, good. What's different?
I feel loved. I feel sure. I feel I am already in eternal life. It will not cease. And I don't feel judged. I know how to confess and go before the Lord. And I have great joy the older I get. I got to a point where our nephew had committed suicide and his mother had committed suicide, and I got concerned about death. But I'm not concerned about death. The Lord is my. I'm no longer concerned about my life. I'm concerned about my life with Christ, and am I living it? I was reading something about our Father which is art in heaven, and it was Courtney. And what do we own? It was ownership. It was another devotion. And what I own is Christ's honor. I feel called. I don't feel bludgeoned. And when I make a mistake and don't do it, I don't feel judged. I just say it and start all over again. It's like a little child falling down and just get right back up. And I feel so loved. unjudged and light, and I don't feel like the leaves are falling, spring is coming.
Okay, okay. What, were you gonna add something? Or your thing?
No, I just raised it to be comfortable. I'm sorry, ignore this hand. I put it in the air when I'm uncomfortable. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
But I did want to say that
I've been thinking about, my life not being that important and how cool that is. Because I take everything so seriously. And my life is a breath and God's got it. And I don't have to take everything so seriously. I agree with Gladys that this is not our experience, but I think about right now the Ukrainians and all the reality of God's judgment and I'm doing I'm studying the book of Revelation right now, and so his wrath is real, and it is justified, and so we have to deal with that too. But thank God for Jesus.
Yes. And that obviously is what makes a difference because, but still, how do you feel about the words anger and wrath?
Mm.
You know, I know there's some people who don't like to deal with messy things like that. I had a friend a colleague, and she said the Bible just leaves me cold. I don't like those bits about anger and wrath at all. What do we do with them as a Christian? I mean,
We pay attention to anger and wrath.
okay. Days of our lives are 70 years or perhaps 80 if we're strong, and that's realistic. We don't know how many we're given. And then this span is only toil and trouble. I wondered if some of that was Adam's curse in the sense, going back, that your life you'll work by the sweat of your hands and so forth. They're soon gone away and we fly away. Okay. And then we go, who considers the power of your anger? Your wrath is as great as the fear that's due you. And then we come to this familiar verse, the next slide, that so teach us to number our days that we may gain a wise heart. What does it mean to number our days? And how does that affect the way that we live?
I think we just don't know, how long we're gonna live. So we just have to number, each day is precious.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's all I've got.
That's right.
That we may gain a wise heart. It's not automatic because a lot of people seem to think that they have all the time in the world. That sort of pagan idea of carpe diem, seize the day, or, live. There can be a positive spin of that, but there can be the negative spin that's indulging in pleasure. But this is a lot, we think we're invincible. I like the way that Eugene Peterson translates it in the Message. It says, teach us to live well. Teach us to live wisely and well. Isn't that good in the light of what Christ has done for us? We live well. And if we live wisely and well, then
I get you some more.
then we really don't need to. And we don't actually sit down and count out, mark a calendar. Here's one day. We don't. But know that we don't know how many we have. And then he turns to the prayer. What does he pray for? Okay, what does he pray for? What are some of the specific things?
Compassion.
Okay.
steadfast love.
Okay, good.
To be satisfied with the steadfast.
Good. Yeah, that's a great verse, isn't it? Satisfy us in the morning with your steadfast love. And I just kind of connected, they needed to be satisfied with manna, with the bread, the physical, but God's love. Satisfy us every morning with your steadfast love. That we may rejoice and be glad all our days. That's kind of sounds like what you were talking
And
about.
wake up
last.
expectant.
But
Wake up expectant.
wake up expecting, okay? Yes, so,
Do you see in verse 15, make us happy as many days as we're sad? Like, even in
Okay,
our
Lord.
balance. Yeah.
is he, well, it kind of sounds like he's saying that, or at least give us some happiness or some reason to be glad, because we've been through a whole lot of affliction. And
But it doesn't ask to remove the affliction.
No.
Yeah.
It says, when my joys equal my afflictions.
okay, that's a great point.
Can you repeat that to me?
But
Can you repeat what you said? So it doesn't ask that all afflictions be removed. It asks that we have as much joy as we have sorrow, as much satisfaction as pain.
and that seems legitimate, doesn't it? A legitimate prayer. Let your work be manifest to your servants and your glorious power to their children. So that, in a sense, that things will live on their children. Let the favor of God, of the Lord our God, be upon us and prosper us for the work of our hands. Oh, prosper the work of our hands. So for later, forever, it seems legitimate. May they endure. And God is, even though we're temporal, at least the children will live on. And the final answer to this psalm, as of the others, is going to be in the resurrection. And that's where we find our joy. And we have the great benefit of reading the Psalms, knowing what's to come. And no matter what the affliction is. So let's let's hear Malcolm and see what he has to say to us today. A cozy comforter, a lucky charm, not with this psalmist, for he praises God from everlasting ages in the Psalms. A God of refuge, yes, and yet a God who knows the death that comes before each birth, who sees each generation die. A God before whom all the ages of the earth are like a passing day, like the cut grass in Larkin's lipid verse. Brief is the breath, moan, stalks, exhale. So we in all things pass, and God endures beyond us. Yet he cares for our brief lives. Isn't that a great line? He cares for our brief lives. And that should be enough. His loving tenderness extends to all his creatures. Our swift years are precious in the sun. In Christ, he shares our grief, and he will wipe away our tears. Doesn't he always seem to find a way to respond to a psalm that gives us hope? Any lines anybody liked?
Yet he cares for our brief life or something like that.
Cares for our brief lives. Loving tenderness extends to all of his creatures.
Yes.
Look great. And our years are precious in his sight. Regardless of how short or how long. our days are. They're precious. In Christ, he shares our grief and wipe away all our tears, alluding to Revelation. And that's, I don't think it gets any better. The creatures, Hamlet also says there's providence in the fall of the sparrow. Mark Twain says, yeah, but the sparrow still falls. Okay, forget him. But there's providence in it. And I see it as this: God cares for his creatures. That's what happens. Okay, let's move on. We'll see how we're doing. Okay. I'm kind of a 55-minute person. Okay, so that Psalm 38 is the next one. And the background, really scholars just kind of guess as to what was going on, but we know that it's a psalm of lament, penitential one. And as usual, you have a complaint and then you have hope, and we'll look for his complaints. And just an interesting thing to think about in it. You ever heard people say that physical pain can be caused by your sin? Have you ever heard teaching like that?
Yeah.
And so this is what Derek Kinder says: to think that sickness is never the result of sin is as unwise as thinking that it's always the result of sin. Any thoughts on that? What?
It's written. Quote that. Okay. What'd you say?
Oh, it's up there too.
It's written up there. So you
I think the sickness is never the result of sin. It's as unwise as thinking it's always the result. Ponder that as we look at the next song. Ponder. And we know emotions affect our physical appearance. I mean, don't you look great after a good cry? You really don't want to go to the grocery, you know, your mascara is running down your face and so forth. Like Tammy Faye. The next. Don't want to be Psalm 38. And this song can be used in services. A penitent suffers plea for healing. Psalm of David for the memorial offering to bring remembrance there. So, you know, when someone's angry at you, don't you hate it? I just want to smooth things over and make it right. And there's that feeling of someone being angry. And so imagine God being angry at you and how you want to make it right. Oh Lord, do not rebuke me in your anger or discipline me in your wrath. For your arrows have sunk into me and your hand has come upon me. Notice all the figurative language, but it's pretty powerful. There's no soundness in my flesh because of your indignation. There's no health in my bones because of my sin. For my iniquities have gone over my head. They weigh like a burden too heavy for me. My wounds grow foul and fester because of my foolishness. I'm utterly bowed down and prostrate. All day long I go around mourning. For my loins are filled with burning, and there's no soundness in my flesh. I'm utterly spent and crushed. I groan because of the tumult of my heart. For my, O Lord, all my longing is known to you. My sighing is not hidden from you. My heart throbs. My strength fails me. As for the light of my eyes, it also has gone from me. My friends and companions stand aloof from my affliction, and my neighbors stand far off. Those who seek my life lay their snares. Those who seek to hurt me speak of ruin and meditate treachery all day long. But I'm like the deaf, I don't hear, like the mute who can't speak. Truly, I'm like one who does not hear, and whose mouth there is no retort. But It is for you, O Lord, that I wait. It is you, O Lord, who will answer. For I pray, only don't let them rejoice over me, those who boast against me when my foot slips. For I'm ready to fall, and my pain is ever with me. I confess my iniquity. I'm sorry for my sin. Those who are my foes without cause are mighty, and many are those who hate me wrongfully. Those who render me evil for good are my adversaries, because I follow after good. Do not forsake me, O Lord. O my God, do not be far from me. Make haste to help me. O Lord, my salvation. Okay, go back to the beginning. So what's going on in this song? What kind of state is David in?
It's in a lot of pain.
But,
He seems to me to be in a lot of pain,
okay,
guilt perhaps.
okay. It says there's no health in my bones because of my sin.
He's weighted down.
Okay. Feels like God's hand is on him.
We can't hear you, so
Oh.
they can. John, all right. He's weighted down.
Okay, yeah. He feels that. He says, your hand has come down on me. It feels like God's hand is pressing down on me. And of course, the arrows, I mean, the pain is just metaphoric. What about there's no health in my bones because of my sin? I don't think we're supposed to look at the Psalms and develop, it's not systematic theology.
Right.
In that sense. So I think what Derek Kinder sounds, I mean, sin can affect you physically. But every physical ailment we have is not because you sin. But here is, and a lot of this is exaggeration, it's hyperbole. Remember, it's poetry. The weight of the burden's too heavy, my wounds grow foul and fester because of my foolishness. He's owning it, isn't he? I've been really foolish. I've done some stupid things, but I did it. I bowed down for you. And he's mourning. He's mourning his sin. That's a good thing to do. There's no soundness in my flesh. I'm utterly spent and crushed. He feels oppressed. I groan because of the tumult of my heart.
Seems to me he ought to have been praying this. Seems to me he ought to have been praying this after Bathsheba and the death of his child. This is just so, to me, deep pain, guilt, and whatever. Especially 13, I am like a deaf man who cannot hear. This is my version. Like a mute who cannot open his mouth. He literally has, even though he is able to create the song, he is also totally helpless. He can't speak, he can't get his thoughts together.
Good. It's a pretty gritty psalm, isn't it?
Very.
But it's honest.
Yes.
And he comes before the Lord, which is good. Oh Lord, all my longing is, wait, what?
I just had a comment.
Okay,
He sounds.
Should be on. I think it's on. Blowing.
Yeah, it's on.
Yeah, it's on.
He sounds so guilt-ridden that he's not forgiving himself. And he therefore will not accept God's forgiveness, or I don't know which comes first. He is not accepting forgiveness and he's in need of forgiveness. And then he kind of turns and says, and my enemies are gonna love this. So don't let them look. I'm about to fall. I see my weakness. But someone else's, it becomes almost selfish again.
yes.
He's He's revealing more of his, bad judgment, I don't know what words to use.
Yes. Yes.
Because in the end, it is not about, forgive me, it's about don't let them gloat so much. Many are those who will hate me without reason. Don't forsake me. At the very end, he says, save me, but I'm not sure if he wants to save his soul or his reputation. Or
All of the above. Maybe not.
Well, David always had a heart filled with contradictions like our own.
He is very human.
But
He is very human.
yes,
I can relate.
yes, I think we can. I think you got a point there. There really could be some of that there. Next slide. Well, I'm sure there are times when we felt totally spent, and oh Lord, my longing is known as sighing. Peterson, when I put it in this message, you've heard this all before. We've talked before. My heart throbs. My heart's about to break. My strength fails me. Again, a lot of this is exaggeration of poetry, but we all know what it is to have a throbbing heart, don't we? But yeah, my friends and companions stand aloof, my neighbors stand. That's just an example of the repetition of Hebrew poetry, and that's all. Okay, next slide, please. So he does have hope, and we hope he's hoping for the right things. It's for you, O Lord, that I wait. Because David does know the Lord. It's you, O Lord, my God, who will answer. Only don't let them rejoice over me, okay? While you're listening, while I've got your ear, or I'm ready to fall. I'm on the edge of losing it. I like the way Fusion says in the message, and my pain is ever before me. He does say sorry for his sin.
He does.
And don't you think there's so many celebrities today or whatever, if some football player does something, or it's usually, I'm sorry for how that made you feel or something, but they never want to own it. That's what they did.
That's right.
Yeah. Even there was a basketball play yesterday, I'm related to college basketball, and the coach's son at Syracuse, the coach's son punches another player in the stomach. And the refs obviously didn't see it. Well, they interviewed his dad after the game, and they said, what do you think of that? And he said, well, it looked like to me like it was an inadvertent hit. But then there was a lot of pushing and shoving going there, and he just had to defend himself. So he said two things. The son later said, I was wrong. Made the father look like it. The son says, I was wrong. I got caught up in the emotions. And yeah, I did hit the stomach. He's now suspended and won't get to play the day against Duke. Okay. So a big day, but I'm proud of that kid because he said I was wrong. And dad did, he probably took after his mother. So don't forsake me, O Lord. We've heard this. That's so important. Oh my God, don't be far from me. Make haste to help me, O Lord, my salvation. Don't leave me alone. Be with me. Yahweh turning away from them was like death. And that kind of gets me. Yes. Aren't there different kinds of death? So think about that coming up. Do you have anything else to add about the psalm?
Wait a minute, you want us to talk about the psalm or you want us to talk about different kinds of death?
Not yet. We'll hold on to the death. Anything before we go to that? Anything else about the psalm that stood out to you? So it's kind of real. There's nothing fancy going on here. We have access to his heart.
I love him saying, oh Lord, my salvation.
Okay,
That's what it's all about.
he knows where he needs to turn.
Well, and then make haste to help me. Aren't we all impatient?
Yeah,
We want it to
yes.
happen now.
Okay, that's a very good point.
Take the pain away.
Very good point.
But sometimes the pain lasts a very long time. And so you're saying, come on, God.
Right.
How long, our Lord?
1,000 years is 1,000 years for us, yeah.
All right, if there's nothing else, let's hear what our friend Malcolm has to say. Have y'all fallen in love with Malcolm?
Yes.
In, agape love?
I'd hug him if he showed up.
Right?
I'd hug him if he
You
showed
would
up.
hug him. For I have found my God and my true friend, and heaven knows I need his friendship now. For I'm weak, my days draw to an end, or so it seems to me. I sigh and bow my head in bitterness. The stress and strain of chronic illness have laid me low. So I don't know if Malcolm's referring to something in his own life. How can I praise you when I roar with pain? Smitten with affliction and infection, no sooner soothed than in distress again, and made more bitter by the sad reflection that half of this I brought down on my own head and folly. I deserve my dereliction. My portion of disquietness and dread. Forsake me not, O Lord my God. Make haste, deliver me, and raise me from the dead. So that's what I thought, the different kinds of death, right? And can't you feel it doesn't have to be the physical death. For this, it could be the death of his health. And there's so many kinds. Next slide, and then I'll get your thoughts on, or anything on Malcolm.
When I look at that, I brought it down. I deserve my dereliction. It was my fault. And I think of so many times, in particular one time when I had said something, I had related a story about someone and was asked to never repeat that story. And a few years later, I did. And the response was, I asked you to never say that again. I was, this quietness, the dread, the angst that I was going through because of what I looked at on that person was just, I hear that in here and also in the psalm. And all I could do is go to God and say, deliver it, forgive, not forgive me as much as, can he accept me? Yes, forgive me, yes, but it was deeper than that. It was much deeper. It's deliver me and forgive me, and may the other person feel my forgiveness and my love and my concern. And only that.
Very good example.
Save me from myself.
Okay, next slide. This I got from Taylor's book, and I really like this because he's talking about the different types of death, I think. And anything that depletes life, as with sickness or natural disasters, is like a death. I mean, think about the Ukraine, the kinds of death. Some of it is real physical death. Some of it is the separation from families and the end of living the way that they once lived. Anything that diminishes life, such as the experience of oppression, or that corrupts life, as with sin, or that warps and distorts an aspect of life, as with depression or madness, is like death. Anything that reduces life to an alienated existence, such as an individual losing community, or that decimates life, such as with imprisonment or the attack of an enemy, is described as an experience of death. Does that ring true to you? I think Psalm 102 kind of touches on this. Any observations about different kinds of death and how we deal with that before God?
There's many. There's many.
There's many aspects of that definition of death that I personally can identify with. But the one that I can't, because I don't never have, nor have I got a friend or relative that's imprisoned, and I'm in the literal sense of it, in a prison. Not just imprisoned in yourself, but
Okay,
imprisonment in the literal
Okay.
sense. And I wonder if anybody can share that. But that's like
self-imprisonment.
either self-imprisonment or knowing when somebody you love is imprisoned.
Huh?
It's okay, but just,
Seems like repression.
well, yeah, I would think depression too, but
Yeah. You really can't, when you're really depressed, and I would say my nephew Keith was just totally depressed, and we would talk, and I would read the Bible, and we talked late into the night, and I know he knew we were together, but I have to confess, I didn't want him to take his life, very far away. But nothing seemed to be working at all, and I, no drugs, no, this is terrible to say something, but I just wanted him to be home with Jesus, and I know he is. And that's my peace. But his agony was just that. It's like he's on the cross all
I've never had a friend or relative imprisoned, but we do know that there are members of our Christian family who are imprisoned. And every week we pray for one of the pastors in China who's been imprisoned for a couple of years and has no access with his family. And there are numerous like that. So, and I think we should, I can identify with that.
That is truly a death. Well, let's look at Psalm 102. Okay, prayer to the eternal King for help. And this is one that I can imagine would be repeated a lot, be sung in worship. One pleading before the Lord. Hear my prayer, O Lord. Let my cry come to you. Do not hide your face from me in the day of my distress. Incline your ear to me. Answer me speedily in the day when I call. For my days pass away like smoke, and my bones burn like a furnace. My heart is stricken and withered like grass. I'm too wasted to eat my bread. Because of my loud groaning, my bones cling to my skin. I'm like a desert owl of the wilderness, like a little owl of the waste places. I lie awake. I'm like a lonely bird on the housetop. All day long, my enemies taunt me. Those who deride me use my name for a curse. For I eat ashes like bread and mingle tears with my drink because of your indignation and anger. For you have lifted me up and thrown me aside. My days are like an evening shadow. I wither away like grass. But you, O Lord, are enthroned forever. Your name endures to all generations. You will rise up and have compassion on Zion, for it is time to favor it. The appointed time has come. For your servants hold its stones dear and have pity on its dust. The nations will fear the name of the Lord, and all the kings of the earth your glory. For the Lord will build up Zion. He will appear in his glory. He will regard the prayer of the destitute and will not despise their prayer. Let this be recorded for a generation to come, so that a people yet unborn may praise the Lord. That he looked down from his holy height. From heaven the Lord looked at the earth, to hear the groans of the prisoners, to set free those who were doomed to die. Now he says, oh, I'm sorry, that's not it. So that the name of the Lord may be declared in Zion and his praise in Jerusalem, when peoples gather together and kingdoms to worship the Lord. He's broken my strength in mid-course. He shortened my days. Oh my God, I say, do not take me away at the midpoint of my life. You whose years endured throughout all generations, long ago you laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you endure. They will all wear out like a garment. You change them like clothing, and they pass away. But you are the same, and your years have no end. The children of your servants shall live secure. Their offspring shall be established in your presence. Any observations about this? A lot of poetic language, just days pass away like smoke, like an owl in the wilderness. A lonely sparrow is what one translation said on a housetop. But
I'm looking at the line where it says, I guess it's like 24, the end. Do not take me away at the midpoint of my life, you whose years endure throughout all generations. I am watching while I talk to that Keith and his death. His children are absolutely wonderful. He has 3, and his wife is glorious. She is a light, was in all of this. And the Lord brought a husband to her. He had never been married. He wanted a wife and he wanted children. And here they were in their 40s. And so it was perfect for her to marry someone who had not been married, but who she had children. So it's just throughout all generations. God works. He has a plan and a purpose. And no matter how much suffering goes on, I'm living to say what beauty is going on in our family through God in our family.
right, and that is good news. Is that God covers at work, does marvelous things. So let's see what Malcolm says. I turn with my last gasp to seek your face before I turn my face back to the wall and wither out my days until my place is taken and my house deserted. All my efforts come to nothing, like the smoke of some stubbed cigarette whose thin blue veil drifts into emptiness, a bitter joke that no one laughs at. Jesus, are you there? It seems a lonely lifetime since you spoke into my soul. Oh, Jesus, hear my prayer. Turn back to me, or turn me back to you, for I am on the brink of black despair. But you are sure and steadfast. Only you could save me now. Rekindle my desire and draw me out of death and into you. So he's not physically dying, but I mean that if you ever experienced the brink of black despair, I know some of you have. But he knows who to turn to, doesn't he? Draw me out of death and into you. Whatever that death is that we're experiencing, draw me out of that and into you. So in other words, if you don't have death, what is he wanting? Life. I liked just how he rhymes certain things like prayer and despair can kind of connect. In despair, prayer. Only you can save me now. Any responses to that?
This is kind of a negative one, but on the, this is kind of a negative one, but on the verse 3 through, I guess 5, when I remember reading it the first time, it really made me go into, I don't know what happened, but it made my mind go into what someone in a concentration camp in World War II might have been feeling that my days vanish like smoke, just days that just go on and on in misery. My bones burn like glowing embers, my heart is blighted and withered like grass. I forget to eat my food. At least this is what mine says. Because of my loud groaning, I am reduced to skin and bones. Seeing those pictures of walking skeletons and so forth made me, that's what came to mind when I was reading that. So even though it's poetic, it's very, very descriptive for me. But real suffering can be, and what may be happening as we speak as Ukraine is happening, may be happening.
Thanks. Do you have something, Glennis?
I'm looking at Malcolm's poem and he's, oh Lord, hear my prayer. Turn back to me or turn me back to you. Obviously, he thinks that maybe Jesus has turned his back on him. And yet he recognizes that Jesus can also turn back around to him, but Jesus has the power to turn us back to him.
Okay.
He's feeling that Jesus has walked away. And he's also feeling that he's walked away. And he's relying on Jesus to pull the two of them back together.
Okay, like turning his back away, the second line in this poem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Reconciliation. And the next line, which we had lost.
On the other,
Yeah. For I am at the brink of black despair. I mean, you're on the edge of a cliff and you are going to go over. And you know, this is it. Turn back to me or turn me back to me. Oh, Jesus, hear my prayer.
so he's on the brink of what? Despair. If you go back to the slide a few, it says choose life. Kind of switch the order of these. We're just talking about death and something from Taylor too. It's just as faithful people, we need to choose life, not death. When we can, and they must choose life against all the forces of death. God himself urges the faithful to do so. Choose life. Can you recall people who have, well, first let me read you an example. What are healthy ways of facing our death? I think, Gladys, you mentioned something early on. It's just, when it comes, but you're going to live with joy because you find your joy in the Lord. And that's great. One of my professors when I was at Regent College in Vancouver is a guy named James Houston. And he was a spiritual director for me, but he taught, he's written a lot of books. He's someone who was always busy with his life, had family and so forth, but he is 99 now. And he has published them with his daughter and son's help. He calls it Letters from a Hospital Bed, Reflections from a 99-year-old. So this is a man who is choosing life instead of that. He's now not very mobile, and yet he is finding the life in that. He is, I wouldn't be able to find the one I'm looking for. It's just so rich, as he says, that now that he's basically lying down most of the time, he can rest. But he finds his mind still active and praying in new ways, and God speaking to him in new ways. And he talks about just that kind of rest, but he's eager for that eternal rest, and he's ready. But it's just beautiful. He could say, I'm 99. But even he cares about his caretakers, the nurses who come in and so forth, and he wants them to know Jesus. And I just thought, that's a great way of approaching death. And he said, I don't know if I'll be here next year, but he knows where he'll be if he's not. So I just took a lot of courage in that. I'm wondering if you have ever known or people who model healthy ways of facing their death. Because some people just don't want to talk about it, and how might their ideas about God inform. And I think that's what makes a difference for us, isn't it? Yes.
At Emory, when you have a terminal illness, they want you to see a psychologist. And so when Eddie was in the throes of his brain tumor, we did speak with the psychologist, and she asked him if he was worried about his future. And he said, no. He said, I know I'll have a future. It might be here, it might be in heaven. So that was very comforting.
That is beautiful. That's beautiful.
My brother-in-law was in hospice, and when they let him settle in and family visit, but they wanted us not to visit for a period of a day or two. I don't know, I don't remember, but it was so that he could be quiet and rest and know, get his questions or anything, whatever. I just thought it was really wise to not be having people trying to make you laugh or whatever. He needed to do the work of going home, and that's what they were saying.
That's good.
My mother's mother died at about 86. She had diverticulitis, and the surgery was very painful. So she went to the doctor. She was having troubles again. And he said, you need to have surgery again. And she said, no. He said, you'll die. And she said, how soon? He said 2 or 3 weeks. And she said, okay. She went home and she called her daughters, and 5 of them came. She said, it's going to be short. They came to her 2-bedroom house and stayed with her for 2 weeks, 5 of them, and laughed and cried. And it was one of the sweetest times of my mother's life.
That is sweet.
I have a friend whose mother, they told her she had a week to live, and she looked up and she said, Polk, I'm on the way. That was her husband. And I thought, what a great way to look at it. Yeah.
Supposedly Eugene Peterson said, his son said, that his last words were, let's go.
What this makes me think of is how sad it is for people who don't have what we have.
Yes.
It's just heartbreaking to think it's the end.
Or to go to a funeral where there's no hope or joy.
Yeah.
And I know I went to one from a friend from high school, and her brother's like, we're not going to talk about, he don't really want to talk about anything messy or dirty, or he didn't really want to bring God into it. Let's just, but it's so people say things like, well, we'll see him again. We'll see her again. Or she's now an angel watching over me. And anyway, it's sad. Except people who don't. Do you have something for us? No, I'm finished.
So, all of you know that my mom was with me for the last 2 years of her life, and she died 2 years ago today. We had lots of discussions about dying, many, and she kept choosing life. But she lived beautifully within the constraints of what she had. But one of the things she did just before she died was walk in, and she was doing all sorts of things with her hands. I said, Mom, what are you doing? She said, I'm making a pie. And I said, what kind of pie? A chocolate pie, and I go, put sprinkles on it. So I said, so here's the pie. Well, it's for Jesus. And she said, and when I finish making it, you put it in the refrigerator, but don't you dare touch it. And then that night, just before she went to bed, I said, Mom, how are you doing? She said, don't you forget that pie. Do not touch that pie. Don't let anybody else touch it. And she was making a pie to take to Jesus. So
That's great. I love that. I love that.
She lived only a couple weeks after that.
Well,
I
y'all
hope
have that
they
beautiful-
enjoyed it.
I was gonna say, I'm not sure how the pie was in the refrigerator, but.
Did it travel well?
Oh, that's bad.
I wasn't trying to be. Okay. So, I mentioned funerals and all, and Taylor in his book talks about, if you're reading it, he makes some comments on funerals and eulogies, and he said most of the time people get eulogies wrong because they just stand up and tell all the good things about someone, and the person is so glowing and good, and they reel off a list of everything. And he says, how do Christians speak a good word about the dead? And he says, speak in a way, I thought this was really powerful, that offers listeners a chance to encounter afresh the grace of God. So that despite the flawed and broken nature of a person's life, you could see the grace of God working through it. And I went to a funeral a couple of years ago with someone who went to my former church, who died midlife, had 2 adult kids. And I heard the best sermon preached. It was at my church, Blackville Presbyterian in Durham, North Carolina. It's the best sermon preached on it. And he used as an example, he had walked the El Camino in Spain. He and his wife and family had walked that. But he had heard a story along the way of some woman who had walked it, but along the way, she twisted her ankle. And so it's a long thing. I guess some people only do parts of it. Most people walk 4 to 5 hours. Has anyone done it? I haven't. My sister-in-law and brother-in-law did. And sometimes you walk 4 to 5 hours a day and so forth, and you're really tired when you get to it. Now, he did point out, he said, there's some people who jump in along the way at different parts, kind of like the cheaters at the Peachtree Road Race, who get in at mile 5. And there they are. It's like, yes, they're not sweating. That's coming from a family of runners. They despise those people. But so people kept asking, like, how was this person? And she finally made it. But she came limping along the way. And this was just so perfect for that my friend's life, because she had a rough go in a lot of ways, a bad divorce, just a rough go. And her health wasn't good at the end, but she made it. She had the gall, and she came limping. And I think in a service like that, it allows us to see God's grace in our lives. And that, I just really love that. And I hadn't thought about it so much until Taylor mentioned that point. So it's okay if someone says, she struggled in life, but God was faithful and she never forgot. God's faithfulness and love to her.
I've got one thing to add. In Bible study years ago, it's not anybody in this church, when the lady passed away, a friend of hers said, she taught me to believe in the Holy Spirit because before she came to Christ, she was the silliest woman I had ever met. And in my life and experience with this lady, she was the most godly, beautiful saint I've ever seen. And we've had a remarkable thing. It's just silly, pretty frivolous, useless, wasted, and all of a sudden she comes to Christ and she is a whole new.
That's great. That's great. So choose life in the face of death. God will heal again, 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 and again. Which is the last line to this. Our prayers break on God like waves, and He an endless shore. And when the seas evaporate and oceans are no more, and cries are carried in the wind, God hears and answers every sound as He has done before. Our troubles eat at God like nails. He feels the gnawing pain in souls and bodies. He never fails, but reassures He'll heal again, 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 and yet again, by Lucy Shaw. So we have that to hope for. And the ultimate hope is just from the sonnet, Death Be Not Proud. And the whole sonnet is John Donne's telling Death, why should you be so proud, right? Because guess what? Die not, poor Death, you can't kill me. And then at the end, it's you're a slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate men. And so why do you swell? They determine all that. And I love the closing couplet. One short sleep pass, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die. And that is our hope. We know that death shall be no more. And thanks to Jesus, the resurrection. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. And death shall be no more. This is the end of these, isn't it?